Okay, so as most of you guys probably already know, in terms of what prep is, before every round a new resolution gets announced. You usually have about 20 minutes of prep time between when the resolution gets announced to the time the debate should actually get started. So given, your walking time, you really only have about 15 minutes to write down whatever you can get down to take to the round with you. So what is the purpose of prep? Anyone have ideas on what is the real purpose?
The 15 minutes?
Yes.
Write down stuff you already know.
Yes, writing down things. That is important. So preparing for counter arguments, determining what your own arguments are, and getting those down. Important. The first purpose is understanding the resolution. It's the first thing you want to do right out of the gate. What does it mean? What is it asking me to do? Does the resolution mandate that you pass a policy? Are you attempting to demonstrate one value over another? What is the debate really about? If the res is about reevaluating the yuan or passing another stimulus package, it's probably going to come down to an econ debate. So you can kind of, based on the resolution, see the trajectory of the debate, which it is the epicenter of. Secondarily, you're determining your advocacy and strategy from which you're writing your arguments. So what action are you going to defend, and why is it good? Or as an egg, why is the action mandated a bad idea? Pretty straightforward. The last thing is preparing for counter arguments. So you want to, as the MG in particular, you want to determine what arguments your opponents are likely going to read and prepare your refutations. Alright, so far so good? Cool. So let's break down prep a little bit. So the resolution comes out. The first 5 minutes or so, you want to be analyzing, you want to brainstorm, and you want to strategize. Alright, so let's talk about these a little bit. So analyzing the resolution. You want to clarify any terms you don't know or aren't familiar with and understand what the use of each term is going to be. You also want to understand the type of resolution. Generally, you will probably mostly hear policy resolutions that mandate a certain policy action be taken. But you may also run into fact resolutions or value resolutions, which ask you to prove a fact or demonstrate one value over another. So you obviously want to identify what type of resolution it is, because that wholly determines your case that comes from it. You also want to know what the resolution is asking you to do, that we've covered already. So brainstorm comes next. So you've got the res, you know what direction it's going. So now what are the possible plan texts? What are the op strategies that you want to draw from that? So you and your partner, or you and your partner and your coach, or you and your whole set of after nags, you should be brainstorming all the different ideas and all the different ideas you can to come up with the best strategy. During that same process, while you're talking to your partner and your coach, it's very important to make sure everybody stays on the same page in terms of what the strategy is, and who is writing what, and what are the important arguments to remember. So there's nothing worse than turning to your partner and saying, okay, do you have the counter plan? No, I was writing the dissat. I thought you were writing the counter. Oh, we both wrote the same dissat. Okay, you want to avoid that. That's no good. So make sure everyone knows what they're writing so you avoid situations like that. It's also good to remember the important arguments. So for example, if you're writing out the case and you have this awesome spike to an argument you know the other team is going to make, you should say, oh hey, hey MG, you should know this to extend it later, So make sure you and your partner are both cohesive on that. So the next 5 to 15 minutes, you're just going to write it out. So that should be writing out your entire case. Make sure it's all finished in terms And the MG should have answers prepped for obvious neg strategies, and the neg should be writing out both the on and off case positions. So as the MG, it's helpful to ask yourself questions like, what is the obvious neg strat against this type of resolution? So an example of that is, if the case is just generally a good idea, or the problems they outline are just pretty, unquestionable, it usually leads to a counterpoint debate. So it's not necessarily that the whole crux of the case is wrong, but rather there's probably a better way to solve it. And so that way your ground is more strategic, so you don't have to argue against a bad idea, rather you're arguing against the method. Does that make sense? So what are the obvious neg strategies against the type of resolution? Also, you should know if your case has any topicality issues, and you should be determining that pretty quick in your brainstorm strategize in the first couple of minutes of prep, so you know what your case is, and as the MG you know what your arguments are stemming from, how you can use your advantages as link terms and offense against any of the off-case positions. You should be aware of what the obvious disads are, what a politics disad would look like for the type of resolution. So obviously if it's a UN resolution, you're probably not going to hear a US domestic politics position. So you should be aware of those things to make your prep easier. And you also should know what specifics you're going to need to look up. So for example, if it's going to be a really tight econ debate, you want to make sure you have all your uniqueness arguments so you control that debate. So think about, what are they going to run? How am I going to beat them on the line by line? And like I said before, on the neg, you're just going to be writing out all your positions. Questions so far? Make sense?
Yeah, kind of. So you're talking about like controlling uniqueness and all that kind of stuff. Are we going to go over like how we can better prep like even before the tournament?
Oh yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Okay,
We'll get to that. And I was an MG, and so I had a particular method that I thought worked well for me in terms of being able to have really good coverage going into a tournament. So ask me again if I don't answer any of your specific questions about that in a little bit. So, okay. Anybody else have a question? Yeah? Okay, cool. We'll just keep trucking. So the next 15 to 20 minutes, walk and talk. So you need to be in your room at the 20-minute mark, or whatever the designated prep time is. There's nothing worse than being late and getting disqualified, and that's no fun. So make sure you give yourself plenty of time. Remember that once you get to the room, you can still be prepping. So give yourself enough time. And during the walk, you should be talking to your partner, or if your coach is walking with you, talk to your coach. Like I said, I was the MG, so I found it really helpful to just say, let's, as we're going, let's just walk through both of the advantages so we're both on the same page. I know what the right extensions are going to be, and you have a clear understanding of every argument that has been prepped. So, walk and talk. A couple tips for extending your prep. First thing, double check your side and your room assignment. There's nothing worse than realizing you've prepped the wrong side when you get into the round. That is no fun. So make sure you double check that. Also, obviously your room assignment, kind of important. No fun to be running around lost. And there's never anyone around to help set you in the right place, when you're in that moment of panic. So double check those things, they're important. Also, you should know where you're going. Before the round starts, get yourself a map. When I was at Willamette, sometimes we do a walkthrough of campus. I guess we did this here last week too. Do a walkthrough of campus, especially the bigger campuses that nationals are usually hosted at. So, you don't have any panic situations and you know where you're going. The next thing that's important, know your opponents. What are they likely to run? Obviously, that can help you a lot in terms of using your prep time effectively. How should you adapt your strategy based on their strengths and weaknesses? Obviously, if they're a team who's known for always going really hard for topicality, and they're really, really good at it, maybe you should just avoid that and read a topical case or something like that, you know? So keep those things in mind. If you don't know them, look them up in the rankings, the NPTE rankings. You'll be able to look up any of the partnerships so you can sort of see their general skill level and how they've been doing. Feel free to ask your coaches, your teammates, your friends. I know a lot of times I'm on, you know, the Facebook chats, hey, who's so-and-so, you know, what should I expect? Another reason why networking in the community can only benefit you, so don't be jerks. Last thing in terms of extending your prep, know your judge. Judge adaptation is huge. And I know when I was debating, it was just like, well, you know, whatever, if I win the debate, I'm winning the debate. No, it's about the judge. It really is. They're always right. And if you lose, it's your own fault. So read their philosophy and adapt. Determine how you should be changing your strategy and your style based on this. If they're, you know, a judge that doesn't like speed, then don't speed, because they're not going to understand what you're saying. Know what arguments they like to hear. Obviously, you're going to have an easier time persuading them and might not have to do quite as much work if you're totally on the same page with them. So what arguments do they often vote for along the same lines? And most importantly, are there arguments they are unwilling to vote for? Because you don't want to waste your time reading arguments and just have the judge shaking their head the whole time. That's not good for anyone. So know your judge. Questions about any of those things? Alright, pretty straightforward. Okay, so now we'll talk about before the tournament. So ideally, most of your prep should already be done going into the tournament. Reason for this, Harley is getting harder. You can't just get away with cruising in, not knowing anything, and rolling out, you know, your generic arguments anymore. It's just not going to work as well. So you should make sure you are prepared. The second thing is there are so many moving factors in debate. Your opponents, your judge, the topic, all those things. So prep is really one of those things you can control. How much you prepare prior to the tournament, before the tournament is up to you entirely. So control that. That's a Corey Harvey special argument. So prep before a tournament should be slightly different based on the type of tournament you're attending. So there's topic area tournaments and non-topic area tournaments, and that obviously creates a different strategy based on both. So at a topic area tournament, you'll know the general areas the resolutions are going to be drawn from, which means you should have arguments prepped for every round prior to the tournament, knowing what you're doing. So this probably depends on the size of your team a little bit, if you're on a small squad or a big squad. So if you're on a small squad, you want to be efficient and think ahead, and the best way to prep based on that. So you want to prep generics that link to everything. So think hedge positions, econ, soft power, politics, those types of things. If you know you're not going to be able to cover everything, you know, just do your best with the generics. And then, you know, in round you'll probably be able to come up with something more specific. Or you can try out a critique. One of the best reasons one of the reasons critiques are so effective is because you can get really deep on your own position and know it much better than everyone else, and it'll link to everything. So try that out. Do your best to have a case and a disad counterplan or a strategy for every resolution, even if the specifics aren't quite there. If you're on a big squad, you will probably be able to formulate a specific strategy for every resolution. But I would advise you, don't count on anybody else to do the work for you. You want to make sure you're really comfortable with the files. So if, you know, maybe a less developed debater is trying out writing a file for the first time, obviously you're going to want to look through it and maybe help them out with that before you take it to a tournament and in prep time go, oh my gosh, what is this, you know? So make sure you read through all the files and make adaptations if necessary, have your own versions. You'll want to talk to the person that wrote it to learn all the tricks and the key extensions if they're not indicated already, and get the general story so you can understand how to best utilize the arguments and flow it quickly during prep. That's the other main reason why familiarizing yourself is so important, because if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to take you a lot longer to flow everything out. So like I said before, you'll want to make changes to update or improve the file. So then, non-topic area tournaments. Do you guys have questions about prepping for well, for a topic area tournament, you'll have the general idea, right? And sometimes, like for NPTE, you actually have the resolution. So you can, in those instances, say, hey, what are the best ideas? And I think the quickest way to find the best act case is just really to get into the literature. Just really start researching, and then hopefully you'll find either that one sweet article that has that really awesome idea and it's all laid out for you, or you'll sort of start to recognize patterns in the literature in terms of here's what the real problem is, and then you can say, okay, what is a plan that can address what that overwhelming problem is, and then even if you have to adapt your plan slightly, if the resolution is something a little bit different from what you expect, you can probably have plenty of relevant material to work with. So that would be my suggestion for prepping app cases for topic area tournaments. And then, and another good thing is sometimes a resolution will be something of policy. Policy is used in the past, so searching through Open Evidence Project or past policy files is a good way to get ideas, at least. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily completely translate, but it's a good way to brainstorm.
So like when you're writing cases and stuff, and I've tried this a couple of different ways, like do you try and write a case like you would just like copy it down, or do you kind of like write an overview and like explain it and then kind of organize it in like the debate form and stuff? Because I'm trying to find like the most efficient way to like put all my research together.
Right.
So.
Right. For cases, I guess what we ask of our students in a good way, I think, when you're embarking on, you've got your NPTE resolution, and you're like, all right, I'm going to write my app file. So I think the best way to go about that is to get into the literature, and when you're trying to compile your research, you can have your overview, and here's the strategic use, this is why this is such a baller case. Then you have your case, write it out the same way you would, the same structure as you would for rounds. That makes it the quickest way to flow it, I imagine.
Yeah.
Other than having to translate it from some other format. So you want to have it broken down into here's my plan text, here's my solvency, here's my advantage, into those pieces. So I think just structuring it that way is best. If a lot of times I would have too much information, and so you can just come up with your own method of how you want to deal with extra information. So sometimes I'd have like, here's miscellaneous uniqueness arguments that I'm not quite sure where they fit, but they might be relevant. Or if I had 10 solvency arguments, but really I'm only going to read 4 of them, unless the resolution is super specific to something else, I would just gray out those other ones, but it was like still good for my information to have. But you'll formulate your own method. But overall, structure it like you would in a debate. Otherwise, it's going to be a long time. So, other questions?
I had a question. I just don't know if it applies into this section.
That's fine.
I was wondering how you leverage a burdens argument in a statement of background as a matter of prep. It just seems like his question about research relates to how you might prepare for a round where what you do is say you have proof that a thing is or isn't.
Right.
I'm very unfamiliar with how you might want to go about imagining a strategy for a round if the round is framed that way.
Well, I'll say 2 things. The first is that I don't think I've ever debated a fact resolution, and I think maybe I had a fact resolution once or twice, and we just said we're going to make this a policy round. So maybe I'm not the best informed to answer that question. I think if just structure it. If you know you're going to a tournament that has a lot of fact reses, for example, I can see how that is an instance in which maybe structuring the case and writing out your file might be a little different because the burden is different. So if you want to, say the burden is, we're just going to make this a net benefits round is our burden to demonstrate why why it is more beneficial than harmful, then you would want to create like a normal policy-esque file. But if you're expecting a fact resolution to come up and you're in a region where maybe that is a little more prevalent, which is also awesome, you might want to adapt it a little bit to maybe include more of the sources and have it more as the evidence to demonstrate that. But Corey, I
was gonna ask. I'm kind of zoning here. I'm doing my own work separate from what y'all are doing, so I kind of didn't hear the entire question. But do you experience fact resolutions regularly?
No, but I feel like I debate them inadequately, and so I'd like to improve them.
Sure. I think that we're seeing a general move in the direction throughout all different regions, throughout all different levels, all different styles of debate across the country, at least in parliamentary debate, away from fact and value and metaphor type resolutions. I think particularly in the last 2 years, there's been, it used to be, at the national level circle, you didn't hear any fact and value resolutions. You just heard pretty much policy topics. At the regional kind of tournaments, you would hear fact resolutions, metaphors, that kind of stuff. But I think in the last 2 years, even, it's gone way down. I think there's been a general consensus in the parley community that we'll mostly have policy type resolutions. But if you're in a region where you'll be hearing fact resolutions, value resolutions, it seems to make sense to try to figure out amongst your squad, your partner, your coaches and everything, how to have debates that doesn't matter whether it's a fact resolution, a value resolution, a policy resolution, because the same kind of arguments can be made in all of those circumstances, right? You can still run, in a value debate, you can still run counter values. That would be essentially what we would consider a counter plan or a critical position, where we say, we're going to criticize the underlying value assumptions that you've made and offer a different one. You can also have disadvantages in fact debates where you say there are policy implications for what kind of facts we establish, and there are external outcomes. If we agree that this is the truth or this is the fact, therefore XYZ policy would be enacted. We think that's a bad thing. And so even if you were right in terms of facts, we disagree with the outcome, we think that we should make it a consequential debate. You can get into those kind of debates, and also you can just straight up prepare for a fact debate. That means you have to be well researched, you have to be well warranted arguments, and that's a lot harder to do because you can't anticipate exactly what resolutions you're going to say.
I had a quick question on that, and maybe we're getting too far down the rabbit hole, but I've never even seen a fact debate, so I didn't know, they're still weighed in a net bed kind of level?
You can try it. I mean, typically when you're in a fact debate, you're going to be in a situation where someone's arguing what's the threshold of truth.
Okay.
Right, what's the threshold for proof? Is it going to be, beyond a reasonable doubt? Is it beyond a shadow of a doubt? Is it a level of certainty? Is it a level of probability? Or is it just a level of plausibility? Is it a preponderance of evidence, whichever side provides a little bit more data? In those circumstances, probably at least on the affirmative, right? When you're on the government side, you're going to say preponderance of evidence, right? We only have to prove 51%, and we win the debate round. If there's a little bit more proof, which means you're getting into a debate that is a list of facts against a list of facts. You've got to prepare examples. You've got to prepare historical truths. You've got to prepare, a number of different factoids. And it becomes who can ever, throw out as many little pieces that they pull together during prep time as they can. But if you have topics that are like that a lot, I would prepare some of your positions in that way. Rather than writing them as disads, I would write them just, you just be concerned about the uniqueness points primarily, because you're concerned about what is the status quo, what has brought us to this point. You're not really worried about the implication of the policy. You're just worried about the more scientific or legal or historical debate about providing who has more facts.
Because the direction of the fact flow will be determined by who controls causation.
Sure. You're probably doing the same research, you're just compiling it in a different format.
Cool. Alright, so non-topic area tournaments. So you're not going to know what any of the reses are going to be or the topic areas prior to the round. So a couple ways to deal with that so you still go in feeling like you're ready for anything. So the first thing, stay updated. The resolutions are often going to be drawn from current events, so read the news, read political magazines, The Economist, those types of things. Blogs can sometimes be helpful. Basically, just know what's going on in the world and you'll probably be okay.
Do you have any good favorite sources and stuff?
I tell you what, I think I have a list in my laptop, so ask me later and I can email that out or something.
Thanks.
So the second thing is prepare for generics. So there are arguments you probably know you're gonna hear that come up tournament after tournament, things like China, the Middle East, economy, politics, military policy, global warming, the environment, those types of things. So I find it's helpful to have a template so you always have a variety of arguments on hand. This is particularly helpful for the NG if you're someone who is going to have to be ready to answer such a multitude of different arguments. I find that it was helpful for prep time. So what does a template mean? So before every tournament, I would have this big Word document and start out with, here are the domestic issues. So here are my generic answers to politics. So I have my list of thumpers. I'd have my Obama capital, political capital low and high, and then include 5 or 6 arguments underneath, and those types of things. So that way, the week before the tournament, I'm just reading the news and I'm plugging things in, and that way, I have domestic resolution at the tournament, and I know I'm going to hear a politics disad against our case, and so I'm just, all right, I got my non-uniques ready, So that way you're not having to look that up during prep time. It's just, oh, okay, scroll down to where I need to be. Similarly, I would do that for, other countries or relations. So, U.S.-China relations low, U.S.-China relations high, and I do that for 5 or 6 countries I thought were going to come up. Does that make sense? So yeah, just including as much as you can prepare in that format, I found was really helpful for prep time. So make sure you have your variety of arguments on hand. That way, you're like, oh, okay, I've got the uniqueness for my disad already, or I've got my answers already. So try that out. Also, another helpful thing you can do for non-topic area tournaments is consult the previous year's topics for that tournament, so you at least kind of have an idea of what's coming. So in terms of what type of resolutions are usually used, whether those are policy or metaphor or whatever they're going to be, as well as what the topics generally focus on. Is it stuff from current events, or is it sort of broader issues that aren't necessarily super related, relevant? So before any tournament, there's a practice component to preparation in addition to just the research. You need to be well practiced, and that's just part of it. So at any tournament, before any tournament, you should be regularly conducting practice rounds, doing speaking drills, running through the research. After you have the research you've compiled, it helps so much to be able to utilize it, to be able to familiarize yourself with the argument, get feedback on it, and most importantly, it helps you prepare for what's going to happen in the real round. And also, it'll help you in prep time if you've already gone through it, so that way it's in your head, and maybe you only have to write 2 or 3 words as you're flowing it in prep, as opposed to the whole sentence. So getting familiar and knowing how the round is going to shake out is pretty important. So that's before the tournament preparation. Any questions on that? No? We're good? Alright, cool. So I guess we'll talk a little bit about prep during buy your partner some time when we talk about prep during the round. So what can you do to help your partner out when they're, like, I'm struggling to write answers, or, they need some help. So ask points of information. You should have your hand up almost all the time, in my opinion. It gets an easy way to clarify information. You can also throw your opponents out of their rhythm, especially when they get going. Sometimes you're so overwhelmed with how much information they're putting out, you feel like you forget to ask points of information. But it's like, no, if you ask them a question, they have to stop, and then you get to catch up. So don't be afraid to ask lots of points of information, especially if your partner needs a little time. And also similarly, points of order. Although judges will probably get a little bit annoyed if you call them every 5 seconds. So be strategic, but also you want to protect yourself and help your partner out. And obviously, if you need to ask a question or call a point of order for your own prep, feel free to do so. Another thing is take prep if you need it. Sometimes it's worth it to say, hey, I need a minute to understand those positions and write out the answers, rather than standing up and kind of struggling through half thought out arguments on the fly. Sometimes it's worth it to take some time. Obviously, you don't want to take too much time, but it is common for people to take a few about 30 seconds or a minute of prep in a round where you need it.
Kristen, can I ask a question up there? How many of you have seen people take time in their speech, at the beginning of their speech, rather than beginning, they say, oh, I'm going to take 30, 40, 50 seconds to kind of gather my thoughts, right? I mean, that was something that I think it's pretty important that Kristen brings that up. That's your time. You don't have to speak. I think we're so afraid that if I'm not saying anything, I'm going to be looking foolish, but you're going to look more foolish if you don't have anything to say and you're trying to say something anyway. In fact, I think we probably, they're certainly not the only ones that have done this, but SIU probably really popularized the practice of before the MG speaks. They're like, we're going to take a minute. I'm just going to kind of sit here and chat for a minute with my partner, make sure that we're on the same page and we still want to do what we were planning on doing. And, I don't really need all 8 minutes anyway. So, well, they turned it away from being this, oh shit, I need to take a minute of my speaking time because I don't know what's going on, into this is just standard practice. I'm going to take a minute and make sure I'm really on top of it, and it's going to actually make me more efficient during my next 7 minutes because I'm not going to be frantic. I'm not going to be wondering what I was supposed to do. I figured it out. We chatted for a moment very quickly, my partner and I, and so now I'm ready to go. And there you are. You're ready to go. Likewise, I don't think there's anything wrong. One of the things that I saw Jonathan and Kelly do a lot last year is he'll stop right in the middle of a speech and they'll just, have a little conversation for a moment. A lot of debaters will do this, but, Jonathan's one that can go a million miles an hour. And then he just stops and says, hey, let's talk about this for a second because I'm not really sure what to do on the next position. They talk for 15, 20 seconds. Yeah, okay, that sounds pretty good. And boom, there it is, right? There's nothing wrong with taking that time during your speech to say, 10, 15 seconds of quick clarification with my partner actually saved me 20 minutes of stumbling and, mumbling along, not knowing what I'm doing or saying, and not making very good arguments. So my 3 well-placed arguments, because I took a moment, are actually going to do a lot better than the 8 arguments that you made that made no sense because you were just trying to say things without, having an uncomfortable silence during your position or during your speech.
Awesome. Very true. The last thing before I open it up for more questions is there are a couple dirty little tricks that can buy you a little time. And you might annoy the judge, but if you really just need, 10 seconds to think something out before your speech, you can shuffle your papers a little bit, oh God, I gotta get these all straight. Adjust your glasses, take a drink of water, take a little extra time setting your timer. So there are opportunities for you to take a little time. I know my partner, if he was ever stealing prep, I would always just say, every day I'm shuffling, because he'd stand up there, oh, I gotta reset my order. Yeah, don't do that too much, but, everyone does a little bit, so. Other questions that are prep related, or anything related? What's up, Colin? Really? No questions? I was so clear and covered everything so perfectly.
What are the biggest problems y'all have with prep time? What are your biggest challenges?
Understanding.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, this is my first year, so I've never even competed in parlay, but the 20 minutes of prep for me, it's hard for me to write out my arguments and fully understand it, or have my partner writing out the arguments and me trying to fully understand it.
Sure. I think the first thing is familiarizing yourself with the arguments, the generics you are gonna encounter over and over, you are gonna read multiple times. Being familiar really does help your prep in terms of, oh, I already know what this argument is, and I don't have to write out quite as much. Another thing you can do to help the understanding between your partner and yourself, I know when my partner was writing out op strategies, if I wasn't clear on every little detail, that was okay. If I was a little confused, I'd say, you know what, let's just give me an overview to start the MO with, and I'd write down 2 or 3 sentences, the thesis of the argument. And you know what, when I started the MO, I was like, oh, this is okay, cool, we got this.
Okay.
So I found that was a helpful thing to just know the thesis of the argument. The little pieces you'll pick up later if need be. Did you have a suggestion?
I was gonna, not for that, I was just wondering, is there anyone from Utah in here? Do you know what your partnerships are gonna be? You don't?
For this?
For a...
I don't know.
Okay. Are you the only Ute here right now, or?
No, there's 4.
Okay. Alright, we'll figure it out then.
All Utah people?
Yeah.
Do you know if all Utah people are present and accounted for?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. That should answer it.
I'll have to find it somewhere else.
There's 4 of them?
Yeah.
You guys can carry
Yeah.
on.
Alright, yeah.
Do you want to,
And then
I don't know, maybe
figure it out
try and
there.
find some next one, but try and find some good resolutions and discuss how we can interpret them in different ways. Because I think that you made a really good point in that first 5 minutes. You have to analyze and brainstorm, and sometimes I don't know, I just have crazy ideas when it comes to resolutions. So looking at the resolution and being this is what whoever is writing it, this is what everyone's gonna see, and this is really the main focus or something like that, rather than, and I don't know, maybe the different advantages to going with that or something unique. I don't know.
Sure. And whether or not you want to have that strategy that's, this is the framer's intent, this is the case that is, the expected, the big thick case versus the kind of squirrely, maybe not as topical, but still defensible against the T argument. That is a lot of times determined on your comfort level with the arguments, who your opponents are, how receptive your judge is to T, those types of things. But there are plenty of examples of reses that can be interpreted in different ways. I know, oh gosh, a couple years ago, Colin was telling me this story, the guy that was in here earlier. He was telling me about how there was a resolution about sanctioning China, but the word sanction also means its opposite. So it could mean the economic sanctions, but it could also mean allowing it. And so that's an example of how most people would prefer the traditional means of interpreting it, but I think they decided to have a little fun with that one.
It's also a grammatical question. I mean,
Yeah.
if something says place sanctions upon, that's one thing. But if a resolution just says the United States should sanction China over its currency manipulation, right? That was the topic that we had.
Yeah.
And our position was, well, grammatically speaking, that means, the closest synonym would be the United States should condone China's manipulation of their currency because of grammatically the way the resolution was written. It said the United States should say, yeah, what China's doing is we agree. We condone that behavior. And so that's the direction we took it and just said we condone it because it'll crash the economy and it'll blah, whatever. But
I think you two were probably at the tournament, but it was something about talking with the U.S. and the Tea Party, and then somebody ran a Boston Tea Party.
Sure. I mean, words are subject to interpretation, right? And not only are words subject to interpretation, but frankly, there are a lot of people out there who write topics for debate rounds at debate tournaments that don't pay all that much attention to the topic that they've written. They just write it. And they don't give nearly as much thought as they should have, and they don't craft a resolution in such a way as to make sure that there's equal sides or equal ground on each side. They don't necessarily always make sure that it's grammatically correct. They also don't always make sure that it follows and conforms with this thing called reality. We lots of times get topics that require the UN or the US or someone to do something that they can't physically or legally do, right? That it goes against the way the world actually works. And so at that point, if you're topical, if the affirmative is topical in those debate rounds, you're setting reality aside, which creates a messy debate, right? Or certainly can. So that's kind of what that first, that Kristen was talking about, that first 1 to 5 minutes of analyzing what does this resolution really mean, and what does it say, and what are, according to our interpretation, what are our obligations and what are the other team's obligations, and then going from there, because it's up to you all, right? Nobody gets to decide how you define and interpret the resolution. That's your choice.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Kristen, what do you think about who should be doing what during prep time? Like speaker positions and
Sure.
whose responsibility is to write the dissad and whose responsibility it is to write the topicality violations and...
Sure. So on the app, the Prime Minister or the first speaker, they will want to be the most familiar with the case, so they should be writing the case. And hopefully they can write out the entirety of the case. I know there are some partnerships, especially just starting out, where the MG does have to do a little bit of the case writing. But ideally, the Prime Minister is able to write out the entirety of the case. During that time, the MG should be preparing answers to the positions you expect from that. And a good way to think about that is just, what would I do if I was the op, and start from there. If if it's a domestic topic, you're probably going to hear some sort of politics dissad. So there's a lot of generics that you can get pretty comfortable answering, and you should make sure you have responses to those. So on the app, it's pretty clear. On the op, it's a little more up to your partnership and how you want to work it out. Just because the LO is going to be reading it, but obviously they probably won't be able to write out the entire strategy by themselves. So you have to be in communication, like I said before, in terms of who's writing what, so you don't have any weird duplications or anything like that. So talk to your partner. I usually would find that it was more helpful for the MO to write out the generic positions, or the positions that we were really comfortable with. So that way he already knew how to read those, or your LO will probably already be comfortable shelling those out. So it's best for them to be writing the brand new, very specific dissad. So I found that was helpful. The MO should probably be most in control of prep if there's any weird, I want to do this strategy, I want to do this strategy. Obviously, you and your partner need to have the working relationship to be able to determine that. But I would say if there's a tiebreaker, the MO should be making the shots, because they are the one that has to be dealing with them in the MO to be able to deal with the MG. So, or excuse me, the prick. So, other questions? I think this is time. So if you think, oh yeah, go ahead.
You said like that's like control uniqueness in like that 5 to 13 minute range. I kind of have a problem like writing too many subpoints for uniqueness. Is there like a specific time allocation? You should spend this much time on uniqueness subpoints. Opposed to like advantage.
Sure. You mean you should probably have a couple uniqueness arguments. You want to have a solid set of uniqueness points, whether that be your advantage or your disad, or whether you're, making non-unique arguments when you're refuting those things. The problem with becoming too top-heavy is that all of a sudden your disad, your uniqueness has probably overwhelmed your link. If there's so much uniqueness on your disad, then the plan probably can't mess all of those up. So there's no real, you should have 2.5, or there's no real set number. But I would say, you'll probably have 2 uniqueness claims with, maybe 2 subpoints under them to provide evidence.